Hi guys, my name is Morgan and today I will be teaching you how to achieve this simple daytime eyeshadow look. The first step to a long-lasting eyeshadow look is to prime your eyelids. The reason you want to prime your eyelids is 1, to give something for your eyeshadow to grip onto, which will help with the longevity of your look, and 2, to provide a barrier between your skin and your eyeshadow to help prevent the oil from your skin from breaking down your eyeshadow throughout the day. While there are eyeshadow primers out there, my favorite thing to use is my concealer, which is the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer. I think that it's easier to just use the same product I'm already using. It's less for me to worry about, for me to keep up with, and 2, because it is a thick concealer, it does a great job in covering up any redness or veins that naturally appear on our eyelids. Eyelids are very thin, so they are discolored often, and I like to start with a fresh, clean slate for my eyeshadow look. To prime my eyelids with my concealer, I just open up the tube, and I personally just use my finger, so I kind of dab some of that concealer onto my finger, and then I will press that onto my lid and kind of blend it around until everything that I want covered up is covered up. And then once I have done that, I will take a fluffy brush with some translucent powder on it, and I will just set the concealer. Whether you're using a primer or a concealer, you want to make sure that it's nice and set. If your concealer or your primer is still too sticky, then when you go in with your eyeshadow, you'll end up putting down too much product and it'll be really hard to blend it out. The second step to creating an eyeshadow look is to make sure that you have the proper tools and products to be able to create that look. In this video, I will be using 3 main brushes to apply my eyeshadow. I will be using a very large, round, fluffy brush. I will be using a medium fluffy brush, and then I will also be using a pencil brush. You can find all 3 of these brushes on Morphe.com. They are $8 each, and these particular brushes are the Morphe and Jaclyn Hill collection. The big fluffy brush that I'll be using is a JH30. The medium fluffy brush that I'll be using is the JH34, and then the pencil brush that I'm using is the JH38. They also have other brushes that aren't from the Jaclyn Hill collection. They're all about $8 each, so they're pretty affordable, and they are great brushes. They'll last a long time. They're great for beginners and advanced makeup artists. If you don't want to get 3 separate makeup brushes, then that's okay. I do at least recommend having a medium-sized, rounded, fluffy brush for blending. The palette I'll be using in this video is the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe Original Palette. There are 28 shades, and it is also sold on Morphe.com. This one is $39. There are many reasons that I like this palette. One of the reasons is that it's got so many fun colors. You've got neutrals, you have colorful shades, you have nice bright kind of highlighter shades, and then you have a black, which is very important to have in a palette. Another reason that I like this palette is that the colors are very blendable, they're easy to use, they're very pigmented. Since they are so pigmented, you don't need to use a lot of product, which means that the palette will last a very long time. If you don't want to go out and buy a new eyeshadow palette, or you're set on using something you already have, that's totally a-okay. All you'll need for this look are 4 colors. You'll need a nice and bright kind of icy shade for highlighting. You will need a transition shade, which is a color that is just a few shades darker than your skin tone. You will need kind of a medium color, something kind of like this, and then you will need a dark shade. I'm going to be using browns, but if you want to use something more cool toned, that will be totally fine too. All right, the first brush I'll be using is the JH30. That was the biggest, fluffiest brush that I showed you before, and I will be using this brush to apply my transition color. This is the color that was only a few shades darker than my skin tone. This will be used first so that it will put down just a little bit of color to help blend out the rest. Now, when I am applying my eyeshadow, I want to hold my brush kind of toward the end. If I hold it too far up, I'm going to put too much product down at first, and then I'm also not going to be able to blend it out as easily because I'm going to be putting too much pressure onto my eyelid. By holding it out toward the end, it helps me to be a little bit lighter with my touch. I also am going to be using a compact mirror to hold it down a little bit lower. This will open up more space on my eyelid rather than looking in a mirror and trying to do the whole squinty thing. It's just a lot easier to look down at a mirror. All right, so I am just blending that out into my crease. I'm not bringing it all the way up to my brow bone. I want to keep that nice and open. And I am using kind of back and forth windshield wiper motions. And then once I get to kind of the end here, I'm kind of wrapping it around back to my eyelid. I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay, so this is what it will look like when your transition shade is applied. It's not a very drastic difference. It's just a little bit of color so far to add some dimension. Now, a trick that I learned to try to keep my eyeshadow nice and neat, especially if you are a beginner, is to take a flat brush and your powder. I'm using the Coty Airspun base powder. It's very cheap. You can get it at Walmart and CVS, so this is a great drugstore powder to use. And I'm gonna dip my brush into that powder. I'm gonna knock off just a little bit. I still want quite a bit on my brush. And then starting at the outer corner of my eye and going kind of up toward the tail of my brow, I'm just going to stamp down some, or not even some, quite a bit of powder, which is going to kind of provide a way for me to keep my eyeshadow nice and neat. This is very similar to the Scotch tape trick. I don't know if you guys have heard of that before, where you put down a little line of Scotch tape and that way you can peel it off when you're done. I like this method better because it doesn't mess up the rest of my face makeup. But that is something you can do as well if you don't have a brush like this or if you just don't want to do it this way. Okay, so as I do my makeup, I will keep cleaning up that line, and then when I'm all done, I'll brush it off and I'll have a nice clean eyeshadow look. All right, so now I'm going to take my medium brush. This is the JH34, and I'm going to dip my brush into my medium color. This one is Buns in the Jaclyn Hill palette. So I'm just going to get some on my brush, tap off the excess. That's very important. And then I'm going to take my compact and look down. And this time, instead of just kind of sloppily getting it in the crease, now I'm going to be a little bit more precise, and I'm going to try to keep it closer toward my actual eyelid than before. I am still bringing it onto my crease, but now I am keeping it closer to my lid rather than going as high up as the transition shade. I am also going to start using kind of circular motions as well as the little windshield wiper motions. And if you notice, I'm also not bringing it quite as far forward as I did the transition shade. I'm stopping kind of right about here. With this shade, I did bring it onto my eyelid, and I brought it about halfway forward. I didn't bring it all the way to my inner corner. I stopped about here. I'm gonna make sure that's nice and blended. I'm going to dip my powder brush again, and I'm going to just continue to clean up that line in between each shade that I apply. All right, now using this same brush, I'm going to dip it into my darkest color. This is Central Park. Tap off the excess. And because this is a dark shade, I'm going to be super, super careful with this one. Not that we weren't careful with the other ones, but this one, it's very important. So with this shade, I'm going to start out just on the very outer corner of my eyelid. The purpose of the darkest shade is just to add extra dimension, and it also kind of helps to make your lash line look a little bit thicker. Pat this color starting on my lid and barely bringing it up and kind of around. So I'm almost making like a little horseshoe or kind of like a little V with this shade. Now, once I am finished blending with this brush, I am going to go back in with my fluffy brush. I'm not going to put any extra product on it, just whatever's left over from my transition shade. And I'm just going to kind of blend that out even further. All right, so that is what this eye looks like. And then we're gonna move on to the next eye. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start by just tapping it onto the very outer corner of my eyelid. And then once I have it kind of packed on there, I'm going to start bringing it up and kind of around in that V horseshoe shape. And then I'm going to blend it out with my fluffy brush. So when I finished blending my eyeshadow, all I did was just kind of dust off that excess powder, and it left me with a nice clean eyeshadow look. That's a super great tip for really anyone, but especially beginners. If you're a little bit nervous about getting messy, then that is a great way to keep your eyeshadow clean and being able to still blend it out. All right, so my next step is to take that icy shadow color, and I'm actually just going to apply it using my finger. You can use a brush if you'd like to, but I was trying to make this as simple as possible. So I'm just going to take that shade onto my finger. In the inner corner of my eye, I'm just going to pack on that color. If I need more, I'm going to take some more. I do kind of want this to be nice and bright. If you feel like your shimmery shade is not going on quite bright enough for you, then what you can do is take either a setting spray, or if you don't have setting spray, eye drops, or honestly even water, and you can just spray the back of your hand, and then you can dip your finger into that whatever you're using, and then once you put it back into the powder, it will pack on more. So that's a tip in case you do want your shimmer to go down more vibrantly. So I'm going to do that on both sides, and I am bringing that all the way to the inner corner of my lid, and then I'm kind of just blending it into where my other shadows stopped. I don't want to totally cover them up because then what was the point in having them there, but I do want to bring them out to kind of meet, and then I'm just going to kind of blend them together. I can also take my brush again and just kind of blend those shades so that there's not any kind of line. You can't really tell where one color begins and one ends. Okay, and then I'm also going to take that icy color, and I have a brown bone brush that's meant to apply it onto my brow bone, but if you don't have one of these and you don't want to get one, then you can also even just use a Q-tip, and then you would just dip that color in and apply it right onto your brow bone. I am going to use my brush because that's what I'm used to using. And I'm just going to dip it into that bright color, and I'm going to apply this, like I said, right onto my brow bone. It just really helps to highlight this area, and it does a great job bringing your shadow look just all together. See how nice it looks? You do want to keep your brow bone highlight nice and tight to your eyebrow. You don't want to bring it down very far, but you do want to make sure that it's blended. You don't just want like a streak of highlighter. You do want to make sure that it's kind of blended into those shadows. Again, that's the most important thing with eyeshadow, and really all of your makeup, even your contours, just to make sure it's blended. You never want harsh lines in your makeup unless you are doing a wing. That's the only time you want harsh lines. If you want to be extra fancy, you can go over that light color that we used with a highlighter. I'm going to use the Jaclyn, the loose highlighter, and this is the shade Extra. And it definitely is extra. It's super bright. This is one of my favorite highlighters to use for this. So I'm going to take some on my brush or on my Q-tip if I'm using that. And then I'm just going to go back over just the very inner corner of my eye, just to give it a nice little pop there. This will help to open up my eyes and to make me look nice and awake. It also draws a lot of attention to your eyes, kind of having something nice and bright there in the inner corner. And then I'm also going to add just a little bit to my brow bone. Now, if you are someone who does not typically put anything on your bottom lash line, then you would stop here. But if you do like your eyeshadow to wrap around and look a little bit more seamless, then you would take that pencil brush and then you would start with your transition shade. Tap off the excess. And you would just start to apply that right, let's see, I need to look up a little more, right under your lash line, keeping it nice and tight. And you would just kind of bring that back and forth and you would kind of connect it up to your shadow, and then that way it will kind of wrap around. You would want to blend that right up into about where your tear duct starts. You don't want to bring it all the way into the corner, otherwise it'll just make you kind of have that black eye look. You always want to keep this nice and bright. So even when you're wrapping it around, you want to keep it right about here. You don't want to go any further than that. I'm going to do that on both sides. And then you can either stop there, or if you want to darken it up, you can take your medium shade and do the same exact thing. But the darker you go, the closer you want to keep it to your outer corner of your eye. So for the medium shade, I'll probably bring it only about to the middle of where my eye, kind of where my iris of my eye is. And then if I wanted to go in with my darkest shade, I would probably just keep it in like the very, very corner of my eye. I wouldn't bring it far in at all. Now for a daytime look, I probably wouldn't add a black eyeliner or anything to my lash line because it can be a little bit harsh. But if you do want a trick to kind of open up your eyes and make them look more awake and just a little bit bigger and brighter in general, then you can take a white eyeliner pencil. This one I think is by NYX. I've used it so much that I've kind of rubbed off the writing, but you can really get any one. These are, you can find at the drugstore. And then I'm just going to apply that right to the bottom of my waterline, and I'm going to bring it all the way into my inner corner. Okay, so if you can see, it already has really just opened up my eye. It kind of almost blends into the whites of your eye and just makes your eye look bigger and more awake. All right, so the next step is just to add mascara. So I actually probably am going to do this off camera because it's kind of hard when I am on camera, but I do want to show you, if you do have eyelash extensions, then a tip is to use these little spoolies and to just take a tiny, tiny bit of your mascara on the spoolie. You don't want much at all, that way you don't clump them together. And that is a way that you can at least kind of darken them up a little bit, especially if you get kind of eyeshadow powder onto the extensions. If you don't have eyelash extensions and you want your eyelashes to look a little bit more curled out and fuller, you can take your eyelash curler, and instead of just putting it straight onto your lashes, you can actually heat it up just a little bit with your blow dryer, kind of on medium heat, and then of course make sure it's not too hot so that you don't burn your eyeball. And then you would just hold it on that way, and then it kind of works as a curling iron for your lashes, so it will hold them curled a lot longer. Okay, so I have applied mascara and I let it dry, and I wanted to show you, if you do accidentally get some kind of on your eyelid or even just around your eye when you're applying it, don't try to wipe it off when it's wet, or you'll just smear it everywhere and it'll kind of ruin your makeup. What you want to do is wait until it dries and then get a Q-tip and then just kind of barely dab at it, and it'll kind of flake off, and that is a way to clean it up without ruining your makeup. Another tip, for me, I always tend to get it right underneath my my under eyes whenever I try to apply it. So if you do this and you kind of have to wipe it off, then you can kind of freshen up that eyeshadow. Just get your brush again and just kind of go underneath where you applied your mascara. Okay guys, this is the final daytime look. I hope, as always, that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new, and I will see you next time.